Hey guys, it's John here from Sonic Drive Studio. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel. In today's video, we're going to take a look at how to get a great rock and metal bass guitar tone with the Line 6 Helix. You can get the tone in this video with the HX Stomp, the Helix Floor, the Helix Rack, and Helix Native as well. And with all those platforms, the sound will be exactly the same. So just keep that in mind, because for this demonstration, I'm going to be using Helix Native. But don't worry, it will sound exactly the same if you dial in this preset on your HX Stomp or Line 6 Helix device. Okay, now let's switch over to my DAW and see what we have going on there. So over here we have Cubase opened up, and we have this very simple session going on just with some drums, guitars, and bass. And this track over here is the bass track. It's just a simple bass guitar DI track. Now before we take a look at the settings, let's just go ahead and take a listen to the full mix for a second here. Here we go. So we've got some very loud guitars, some super punchy drums, and some thick bass going on. Let's see what happens when I play this mix without the bass. Here we go. The mix gets a lot thinner with the bass turned off, obviously. Let's turn the bass back on. Much better. Let's listen to the bass soloed for a second. I really like that bass tone. It's very thick and full. It has a bit of distortion going on, especially on the top end. And it does have a nice mid-range texture going on there, which really helps the bass to cut through the mix. So that's pretty awesome. Now let's take a listen to the bass together with the drums. And once again with the guitars also turned on. Here we go. Great, because even with that huge wall of guitars, you could still hear the bass cutting through the mix, so that's great. Now let's take a look at the settings in Helix Native to see how I achieved that tone. And after that, we're also going to take a quick look at the processing that I did in the DAW to make the bass guitar fit the mix even better. So we're just going to open up Helix Native here and see what we have going on. So a very simple preset. That's how I like to work. Most of my presets are very basic and simple. The less tools you need to get a sound, the better. We're starting off the chain here with a dynamics block, and I'm using the Legacy tube compressor. It's a very cool compressor that sounds good and it's very easy to use. And I'm just using that to squeeze the bass guitar together before going into the amp. So it makes the bass guitar sound a bit more even, but in a natural way, in my opinion. Then we're splitting the signal with a parallel path, and the parallel chain has the distortion block in it. And I'm using the Clawthorn Drive model, which is actually a bass overdrive pedal. And I have the fuzz section turned off, so I'm only using this for the overdrive section. And these are the settings that I'm using, very simple settings. OD gain at 6.7, OD tone at 6.8, OD level at 3.3, low boost on, and that's about it. Now let's turn the distortion block on and off for a second so you can hear what it's doing. Here we go. So even with the distortion block turned off, it's a great and very clear bass sound. But since this is a very heavy and dense rock mix, we're going to need that distortion to make the bass sound fuller in the mix. And of course, a little bit more aggressive, which always helps with rock and metal. And the main reason why I'm putting this distortion block in parallel is basically because I want to keep the low end intact. And distortion with your bass guitar can really kind of destroy the low end a little bit. So this really helps to keep the low end intact and to make the mid and high frequencies more distorted. From there on, we're going into the AMPG SVT4 Pro amp model, which I really, really love for bass guitar. And I basically almost always use this one for my bass parts. Now this is a very versatile bass amplifier that can do a lot, and it really allows you to shape the tone of your bass to a great degree. So I highly recommend checking this bass amplifier out. Some of the things that I did was crank the mids over here, and I set the mid frequency to the highest setting. I'm going to play around with that for a second so you can hear what this does. Here we go. So that really lets you fine-tune the sort of mid-frequency focus of your bass guitar. In my instance, I've set it quite high, so I'm using it to sort of make the bass guitar sound a bit more bright. I've also added a little bit of treble. Let's take a listen to how this can affect the sound. Yeah, so around 7 seems to be a great place for me. So those are some very, very powerful controls, as you could hear. Now these switches over here are also very cool and powerful, and they allow you to shape the tone of your bass even further. Now let's take a listen to what these 4 controls have to offer when it comes to tone shaping. I'll just turn them on and off so you can hear what they're doing. Here we go. So the ultra low basically makes the bass guitar sound more scooped. And when you turn that off, there's a lot more mid-range in the tone of the bass guitar. Now let's check out the ultra high switch. Obviously that one makes the bass sound brighter, but we don't really need that in this tone because I've already added a lot of brightness with the mid and treble controls. Let's check out the bright switch. Yeah, so that makes the bass guitar come forward a lot more. I like it. And the final one is to enable or turn off the equalizer. And this graphical equalizer is a very powerful tool for shaping the sound of your bass guitar in the mix. I'm using it to gently remove some sub-lows. I'm also using it to remove some low mids over here because those frequencies can get in the way of your guitars, especially in such a dense rock or metal mix. Also cutting out some 600 Hertz very gently. And I'm boosting some upper mids over here. This is helping the bass to cut through the mix even more. Overall, I think we've got a great balance going on here, but a lot of that has to do with the impulse response that I'm using. So let's take a look at the IR block right now. I'm using the high resolution IR block. And of course, I'm using an OwnHammer bass IR. I'm using the OH410 AMPG SVT10 cut ribbon IR. And this is based on a 4x10 AMPG SVT cabinet, but this is a special file that has been treated to sit in the mix even better. It's using a ribbon microphone, and it has some EQ cuts in it to make it sound more balanced right from the start. So I would highly recommend checking out the OwnHammer AMPG package for bass tones, because I think it really can take your bass tones to the next level. Not only does it feature multiple cab sizes, it also features multiple speaker options, and it also features multiple voicing options to really help you shape your tone. So that's all that we've got going on in this very simple preset. Just 4 blocks with a parallel distortion block in front of the amp. And a solid impulse response after the amp, of course. Simple but effective. I should not forget to mention which bass guitar I'm using. I'm actually using my Sire 5-string. I think it's the M7 model. I'm not entirely sure what the model is, but it's basically a 5-string jazz bass by Sire. It's a great bass guitar. I think it sounds awesome, and I would highly recommend checking those out as well. They have very high quality, but they're very affordable as well, so that's very cool. Now let's take a quick look at the processing that I have going on here in Cubase. As you can see, I'm using the Slate Digital virtual tape machines over here just to gently warm things up a little bit. And then we're going into the Slate virtual mix rack with some simple processing. We're starting off the chain over here with a virtual channel. I'm also using this for some very subtle tone shaping. And this isn't only on the bass guitar, this is on every instrument in the mix. Then we have an equalizer going on here, and we're using that to further cut out some low mids, again to make room for the guitars a little bit, somewhere around 250 Hertz. And I'm using the low filter here to filter out some unwanted sub-lows. Then we have the Air EQ Air module going on over here, and I'm only using that to cut out some high end, because we want to leave that high end for the guitars and cymbals. A bass guitar doesn't need a lot of high end, but I'm using this in a very subtle way. I'm only removing all the high frequencies above about 7K. And then we have two compressors going on here. I'm using the first compressor over here to just even out the dynamics of the bass guitar even further, but I'm not using it to completely squash the bass. It's just to kind of shave down the peaks in the mix a little bit. And then after that we have the Monster module. This is basically an 1176 emulation, but with the all buttons in mode engaged. It's basically a very, very heavy and aggressive compressor, but I'm using it very gently in parallel. The mix has only been set to about 15%, and I'm just blending that in to make the bass guitar even thicker in the mix. Let's take a listen to the bass guitar with these compressors turned off and on so you can hear what they're doing. It's not a big deal, especially solo. The difference is quite subtle, but it's really helping the bass sit in the mix. So that's all that we've got going on here to get this great rock and metal bass guitar tone. So thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe along with the notification bell, and you can also follow Sonic Drive Studio on Facebook and Instagram, and I hope to see you in my next video. Cheers!